For those of you struggling with an addiction, whether it be smoking, drugs, alcohol, gambling, these addictions all work in a similar way, and that it involves a reward pathway in the brain. Dopamine is released, which brings about a temporary feeling of pleasure, and you want to repeat this experience over and over. We're going to look at how this works on a biological perspective and what you can do to trick your brain so that we can get rid of the addiction for good. I found this presentation template and thought it looked kind of cool, so decided to use it for the presentation. For the visual people out there, let's just say the ghost here represents the addiction. I felt like doing this video because I feel like a lot of people are struggling with addiction problems nowadays. I look at what so-called experts out there are advising people, and I just feel like they give very generic advice, such as recommending to get involved in group therapy with people struggling from similar issues, or to write down in journals how you feel about the addiction, etc. From my point of view, these strategies are not going to be as effective as these experts might think. What I've learned is you want to get your mind as far away from the addiction as you can. You don't want your life to revolve around the addiction. So the goal is to get it out of your mind. Before we start off, I just want to say I'm a pharmacist. I'm in no means an expert in this field. Here I'm talking uniquely off of my understanding of the topic and personal experience on it because I feel like it can help a lot of people out there who are struggling with this issue. I think the main mistake someone trying to get rid of an addiction can do is focusing too much on the mistakes they've made that have led them to where they are and having a retroactive perspective rather than a proactive one. For example, punishing yourself when you give into the addiction or when you relapse. That's something that, in my opinion, you should never do because you encourage your mind to always be thinking in the past when you should teach your mind to instead focus on the now. For example, if we take smoking, let's say you smoke a cigarette, then you feel guilty, ashamed of yourself, you wish you could go back in time and erase it. While doing so, the addiction is consuming you. It makes you emotive, it keeps your mind busy on it, etc. My advice is if you do relapse, just don't make a big deal out of it. Move on as if nothing happened. Do your best to keep it out of your mind. And if you don't let it consume your mind all day, then it's a lot easier to avoid it. Let's try to break down Socrates' quote that we saw on the previous slide. A way we can look at this is that we are basically shaped by our thoughts. It's important to realize that every day, whatever you do and think creates patterns in your brain. Think about when you learn a new language, for example. The brain adapts, creates new pathways. You get used to hearing the same words and start understanding what they mean. And depending on how much effort you put in, within a couple months, you'll be able to start communicating in the language. The reason behind this is because of your brain creating these new links between neurons. When you have an addiction, you've already created connections in your brain, and every time you give in to the addiction, it reinforces pathways in your brain that doing these certain action will lead to a reward. With time, these pathways can be weakened. Instead, you want to focus on building productive pathways that will benefit you, such as physical activity, for example, in which case your body will get used to the natural reward of exercising, which is induced by the release of endorphins. At first, though, you won't feel it much compared to the intense dopamine that your brain is used to receiving because your brain has been desensitized. It's used to being bombarded with large amounts of dopamine whenever you give into the addiction. It's kind of like someone who's used to eating really salty food and then eats something that is rather low on salt. They'll find the food to taste rather bland compared to someone who follows a low sodium diet. It's also the same concept with sugar, guys. So for those of you who are addicted to sweets, you'll notice that once you cut sweets out of your diet, everything just starts tasting sweeter. Frozen yogurt might start tasting almost as sweet as ice cream. So as we were saying earlier, the connections that you don't use, your brain will get rid of with time. The scientific term for this is synaptic pruning. But this is not going to happen overnight, though. It's just like getting rid of a bad habit. If you pay attention to the bad habit and you make an effort to stop it, you will teach your brain, which has defaulted to doing the bad habit, to gradually quit doing so. In my opinion, guys, the real hack to getting rid of an addiction is to occupy your mind with something else. It's going to be very hard to quit if you're bored and you have nothing else to do. By keeping yourself busy with something else, it's going to be way easier for you to quit. Find activities that interest you. Join a club, join a sports team. It really doesn't matter what it is. As long as it keeps you motivated, it keeps your mind off of the addiction. Make sure to focus the least on the addiction. Don't try to count the days since you quit or anything like that. And you'll see a couple months later, you'll look back and the problem will be gone without you noticing a thing. I know it might feel impossible at first because you taught your brain to rely on these pathways every day, but your brain will learn to adapt. So guys, you might have heard from other people the suggestion to set a certain quit date when you finally feel ready to do so. My advice is you don't want to set a specific date and time when you'll finally decide to quit. You tell yourself to quit now. It starts right now. Don't put it off until tomorrow. Also, another word of advice before I end the video. Guys, avoid flirting with the idea of relapsing. Eventually, you'll give in if you do. You might think, oh, there's no harm done if I just take one sip of alcohol or if I just take one puff of cigarette. It's important to realize that this type of thinking is your brain trying to trick you back into the addiction because your brain has been taught that it needs this type of stimulus to get the feeling of reward. Also, for those of you addicted to alcohol or smoking, I want to add that there are medications out there that can help you. So make sure to talk about it with your local pharmacist or doctor so that they can look at the treatment options for you and therapies that can support you.